Picture this. A servant girl spends 22 years scrubbing floors and swallowing humiliation in silence, believing her father died a hero saving the king's life. Then, in a single afternoon, everything changes. The king catches his 11-year-old son forcing servants to crawl like animals, to beg for forgiveness for simply breathing the same air as royalty. But instead of punishment, the king does something that shatters the entire kingdom. He gives that servant girl power over the prince, himself, half the kingdom's lands, a voice that can override royal decisions, a title that transforms her from invisible to untouchable overnight. But here's what no one tells her. The power is built on a lie. Her father wasn't a hero. The king is dying and has less than 8 months to live. And the prince, that brilliant, wounded 11-year-old boy she now has authority over, isn't just angry. He's patient, calculating, already moving pieces on a board she doesn't even know she's playing on. Her mother's sudden illness, her brother's near-fatal accident, the mysterious fever affecting a child she cares about, none of it is coincidence. Now Elena must make an impossible choice. Use the power she never wanted to protect the people she loves, or surrender it to save them from a child who's learned that the best revenge isn't hot and explosive. It's cold, methodical, and absolutely inevitable. Because in 8 months, the only person protecting her will be dead. And the prince? He'll have all the time in the world to teach her what real powerlessness feels like. The throne room had never felt so suffocating. Elena stood frozen 3 steps from the dais, her rough linen dress suddenly feeling like it weighed more than the stone walls surrounding her. King Roderick's words still echoed in her skull, each syllable a hammer strike that threatened to crack her understanding of reality itself. Half the kingdom's lands, power over the prince's decisions, her father's sacrifice, laid bare before hundreds of nobles whose hatred she could taste in the air like copper on her tongue. Her hands trembled, not from fear, though terror certainly coursed through her veins like ice water, but from something far more dangerous, the physical impossibility of processing what had just shattered her entire existence. 22 years. Her father had been dead for 22 years, and in all that time, no one had told her the full truth. The king owed them everything. The king had promised. A dying man. The king was now dying himself. Prince Caius stood beside his father's throne, and Elena made the fatal mistake of meeting his eyes. What she saw there drained what little warmth remained in her body. The 11-year-old boy no longer looked like a child throwing a tantrum. His pale blue eyes held something ancient and patient, something that calculated and measured and planned. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscle twitching beneath his smooth cheek. But it was his hands that made her stomach twist. They hung perfectly still at his sides, not trembling with rage, not balled into fists, just hanging there, waiting. A noble in crimson velvet, Lord Ashford, if her racing mind remembered correctly, broke the silence with a voice like grinding stone. "Your Majesty, this is madness. The girl is barely literate. She knows nothing of governance, of diplomacy, of—" "She knows suffering." The king's interruption was quiet, but it cut through the hall like a blade, through silk. She knows what it means to scrub floors until her fingers bleed, to eat scraps while watching others feast, to bow her head while children half her age spit orders at her. His breathing had become labored. Elena noticed with a jolt. Small beads of sweat dotted his forehead, despite the cool autumn air filtering through the high windows. My son needs to learn these things, and Elena will be his teacher. The word teacher landed like a slap. Elena's mind reeled. She was supposed to teach a prince. The same boy who'd made her crawl on her hands and knees yesterday to pick up coins he'd scattered across the floor, laughing as she scrambled. The same child who dumped an entire pitcher of wine on her head last month because his soup was too cold. "Father," Caius finally spoke, and his voice was eerily calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that precedes storms. "I understand you wish to honor the debt, but perhaps there are other ways. Gold, perhaps. A title for her family. A position in a distant province where she could live comfortably, far from the complexities of court. Clever, Elena thought with dawning horror. The boy was offering her an escape. A golden cage, yes, but a cage far from his reach. And in his tone she heard the unspoken promise, "Take this offer, or face what comes when my father is gone." King Roderick's laugh was bitter and wet, ending in a cough that made several courtiers flinch. "You think I don't see it, boy? You think I don't recognize my own reflection from 30 years ago?" He leaned forward, and Elena saw how the simple motion cost him, how his knuckles went white gripping the throne's arms. "Your grandfather never broke me of my cruelty. He punished me, yes, beat me, lectured me, locked me away. But he never made me understand. Not truly. Not until it was too late, and good people had suffered for my education." Something shifted in Caius's expression. For just a heartbeat, Elena saw fear flicker across his face before the mask of composure slammed back into place. What had his father done? What lessons had cost good people their suffering? "Elena will remain here." The king's pronouncement was final. "She will attend all council meetings. She will review all decisions regarding the kingdom's lower classes. She will have chambers in the East Wing, befitting her new station. And most importantly," he paused, his gaze sweeping across every noble face in the hall, "anyone who harms her, threatens her, or works against her will be considered an enemy of the crown. This includes my son." The silence that followed was alive. Elena could feel it pressing against her skin, could feel hundreds of eyes drilling into her back like hot needles. She wanted to run, wanted to scream that she didn't want this, that she just wanted to survive, that power and titles and revenge against princes were things for people in stories, not for girls who'd spent their whole lives trying to become invisible. But then she remembered. 3 nights ago, her mother had coughed blood into her handkerchief and tried to hide it. 2 weeks ago, her younger brother had collapsed in the stables from working 16 hours straight. Yesterday, little Martha, barely 7 years old, had burns on her arms from the kitchen fires, and no one had bothered to treat them because servants' children didn't merit the expense of ointment. The king was giving her power. Not for herself. For them. "I accept." Her voice came out steadier. Then she felt, "I will honor my father's sacrifice and serve the kingdom as you command, your majesty." She didn't miss how Caius's perfectly still hands finally moved, just slightly, curling into fists so tight his knuckles cracked audibly in the silent hall. She didn't miss how his lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could promise murder. And she especially didn't miss how Lord Ashford and 3 other nobles exchanged a glance that spoke of secret conversations and plans already forming like poison in dark water. King Roderick nodded, then stood with visible effort. "The ceremony will be held tomorrow at dawn. Elena of House. What was your family name, child?" The question hit her like a fist. Her family had no house name. Servants didn't get house names. They were just people. Nameless, faceless, interchangeable. "Thorn, your majesty." The lie came from somewhere deep and desperate. "My father was Marcus Thorn." She had no idea where the name came from, only that she needed something, anything, to make her sound less like prey. "Elena of House Thorn, then." The king's eyes held something that might have been approval or might have been pity. "Tomorrow, you become nobility. Tonight," he coughed again, harder this time, and when he pulled his hand away from his mouth, Elena saw the unmistakable dark stain on his palm that he quickly concealed in his robes. "Tonight, I suggest you pray. You'll need divine favor for what's coming." The court began to disperse in a chaos of whispers and scandalized gasps. Elena stood rooted to the stone floor. Tomorrow her life would change forever. Tomorrow she would have power she never wanted. Tomorrow she would become everything the nobles despised and everything the prince would destroy. But tonight she had to figure out how to survive until dawn. Because in the churning mass of departing courtiers, she caught sight of 4 figures lingering near the eastern corridor, their heads bent. Together in urgent conversation, their eyes occasionally flicking toward her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. And when Prince Caius walked past her, close enough that she could smell the lavender oil in his hair. He leaned in just slightly and whispered 5 words that turned her bones to ice. "My father won't live forever." The East Wing chambers smelled of beeswax and something Elena couldn't identify. Something expensive that made her nose itch. She stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold, staring at furniture that cost more than her entire family would earn in 5 lifetimes. A 4-poster bed draped in deep blue velvet dominated the room. Real glass in the windows, not oiled parchment. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes covered walls that didn't leak cold air through cracks. A writing desk with actual parchment and ink. This wasn't a room. This was a museum of wealth she had no right to touch. Her old straw mattress in the servants' quarters was probably already given to someone else. Martha maybe, or one of the new kitchen girls. The thought should have brought relief, one less body crammed into that freezing space. But instead it felt like severing an artery. That mattress had been hers for 22 years. This room belonged to someone else. Someone Elena would have to become by dawn. "You planning to sleep in the hallway?" The voice made her jump so violently she nearly tripped over her own feet. An older woman stood 3 paces behind her. Gray hair pulled back severely, wearing the deep green of the royal household's senior staff. Her face was weathered like old leather, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "I'm Marjorie, head of the household. The king sent me to prepare you." The pause before prepare carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments. Elena forced herself to turn fully to meet those cutting eyes. "I don't need preparing. I know how to clean a room." "You're not here to clean it, girl." Marjorie's voice was flat, factual, brutal. "You're here to live in it. There's a difference. A noble doesn't know which fork to use because she was taught. She knows because she's used them since she could hold a spoon. You have 12 hours to learn what takes most people a lifetime." She gestured sharply toward the room. "Get inside. Standing in doorways like a beggar won't help." Elena's feet moved before her pride could stop them. The floor didn't creak. Servants' quarters floors always creaked, groaned, threatened to give way. This floor was solid, silent, probably stronger than most walls she'd known. The wrongness of it made her skin crawl. First lesson. Marjorie closed the door behind them with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. "Everyone in this castle wants you dead or ruined. The nobles because you're an insult to their bloodlines. The servants because you abandoned them. The prince because you're his new chain. And me?" She smiled, thin and humorless. "I don't care. Enough to want anything. That makes me the only person you can trust, and trust is a generous word." "Why are you helping me then?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Because the king asked. Because I owed your father." Marjorie moved to a large wardrobe and threw it open, revealing dresses that made Elena's throat close. "Marcus Thorne saved my son's life 18 years ago. Took a kick from a horse that was meant for my boy. Broke 3 ribs and never said a word about the pain." Her hand stilled on the fabric. "Your father was the best man I ever knew. Died proving it. That's why this whole thing terrifies me." The air left Elena's lungs. "What do you mean?" Marjorie turned, and for the first time, Elena saw something other than hardness in her face. Fear. Real, bone-deep fear. "Your father saved the king by accident, Elena. He was running. Running from something or toward something, I never knew which. He just happened to be in the right place when that assassin struck. The king saw a hero. I saw a man who died confused about why he was suddenly important." She pulled out a deep burgundy dress, examined it, put it back. "You're about to have power built on a misunderstanding. And when the truth comes out, because it always does, what do you think happens to the girl who accepted rewards for a lie?" Elena's hands had gone numb. "What truth? What are you talking about?" "I don't know the whole story, but I know your father had debts. Bad ones. To people who don't forgive. 3 weeks before he died, a man came looking for him. Rough type, scars, asked questions about Marcus's outstanding obligations. Your father hid in the stables for 2 days. Marjorie selected a simpler dress, forest green with minimal embroidery. Then suddenly he's in the capital. Suddenly he's near the king. Suddenly he's dead and his debts die with him. Convenient, isn't it? The room tilted. Elena gripped the bedpost, feeling the velvet compress under her fingers too. Soft, too rich, too wrong. You're saying my father wasn't a hero. I'm saying heroes are complicated. Marjorie's voice gentled slightly. He saved a life. That's true. His motives for being there, that's murkier. But the king doesn't know that. And if you're smart, he never will. Because the moment people suspect your father's sacrifice was anything less than pure. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. A knock at the door made them both freeze. 3 sharp raps, precisely spaced. Marjorie's face went carefully blank as she opened it. A young man stood there, maybe 16, wearing servant's clothes but holding himself like he owned the stones beneath his feet. His dark hair was too carefully arranged for someone who worked in kitchens or stables. His smile was too practiced. Marjorie, and the famous Elena. How wonderful to finally meet the girl who conquered the kingdom in a single afternoon. Thomas. Marjorie's voice carried a warning. What do you want? Just to welcome our newest noble to her elevated station. Thomas stepped inside without invitation, his eyes cataloging everything, lingering on Elena with an intensity that made her want to step backward. We servants have been talking. Some are angry you left us behind. Others are hopeful you'll remember where you came from. I'm curious which group will be proven right. I didn't leave anyone. Elena found her voice, though it shook. I didn't choose this. No one chooses their circumstances, but everyone chooses their actions. Thomas moved closer, invading the space between them with deliberate precision. Your father made choices, saved a king, died for it, left you and your family in poverty for 22 years while that debt went unpaid. Now suddenly the king remembers? Suddenly he's generous? His smile widened, showing too many teeth. Strange timing, don't you think? Almost like something changed, something he recently discovered that made honoring this debt urgent. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you implying? I'm implying the king is dying, Elena. Everyone knows it. The court physicians whisper about 8 months, maybe less, and dying men want clean consciences. Thomas leaned back against the writing desk, casual, dangerous. But here's what interests me. Your father died 22 years ago. The king had 22 years to honor this debt. Why now? Why you? Why give you power over his son instead of just gold and land? His eyes glittered. Unless he's not trying to honor your father, unless he's trying to punish his son, and you're the weapon he chose. The words hit like stones. Helena had been so overwhelmed by the impossibility of her situation that she hadn't stopped to question the why behind it. The king could have given her money, a title, land far from the capital. Instead, he'd placed her directly in Caius's path, given her power over the boy, made her a permanent reminder of the prince's humiliation. Get out, Thomas. Marjorie's voice was ice. Now. Thomas pushed off the desk with theatrical slowness. As he passed Elena, he paused, his breath warm against her ear. The prince visited the servants' quarters tonight. Asked about you, about your family, about your mother's illness and your brother's exhaustion and little Martha's burns. He pulled back just enough to watch her face drain of color. He was very thorough in his questions, very interested in the details of everyone you love. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him with that same soft, terrible sound. Elena couldn't breathe. The room was too small and too large simultaneously. Her mother, her brother, Martha. Everyone she'd ever cared about, now targets painted on flesh because she'd accepted power she never wanted. Marjorie, her voice cracked. What do I do? The older woman's face was grim as winter stone. You survive until dawn, then you learn to fight. Because that boy isn't making threats, Elena. He's making promises. Dawn broke over the castle like a wound splitting open, all crimson and gold bleeding across gray stone. Elena hadn't slept. How could she, knowing that in less than an hour she would stand before the entire court and be transformed into something she could never undo? The forest green dress Marjorie had chosen hung on her frame like a costume, beautiful and foreign and suffocating. Her hair had been twisted into an elaborate arrangement that pulled at her scalp with every movement, tiny reminders that this body no longer belonged to her alone. The great hall was already packed when Marjorie led her through a side entrance. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, and the weight of their collective hatred was a physical thing, pressing against her chest until breathing became a conscious effort. Nobles in their jewel-toned silks and velvets, their expressions ranging from barely concealed disgust to cold calculation. Servants lining the walls, their faces harder to read but no less intense. And there, at the front near the dais, Prince Caius stood beside his father's throne, dressed in midnight blue that made his pale eyes look almost colorless. He was smiling, not the cruel smirk from yesterday, but something worse. Genuine pleasure. The kind of expression someone wears when they've already won and are simply waiting for everyone else to realize it. King Roderick looked diminished in the morning light. The throne seemed to swallow him, his shoulders hunched forward as if the weight of his crown had finally become too much to bear. But his eyes were alert, feverishly bright, burning with something Elena recognized from watching her mother these past months. The desperate intensity of someone racing against their own mortality. Approach. His voice carried despite its weakness, cutting through the murmurs that filled the hall like wasps in a disturbed nest. Elena's feet moved. Left, right, left, right. The stone floor stretched endlessly before her. She could feel sweat trickling down her spine, soaking into the expensive fabric. Her hands trembled at her sides, and she hated herself for the visible weakness, hated that everyone could see how terrified she was. When she reached the dais, she remembered too late that she was supposed to kneel. She'd watched nobles do this 1,000 times while serving them, but the mechanics of it suddenly seemed impossibly complex. How deep? How long? Which knee first? She dropped clumsily, the dress tangling around her legs, and heard several barely suppressed laughs from the crowd. Elena of House Thorn. The king's pronouncement silenced the room. 22 years ago, your father Marcus gave his life to preserve mine. He threw himself between me and an assassin's blade when he had no obligation to do so, no reward to gain, nothing but the knowledge that saving a life was the right thing to do. He paused, and Elena watched his hand tighten on the throne's arm. I have spent 2 decades living with that debt. 2 decades wondering how to properly honor a sacrifice so pure, and I have failed. Failed to protect your family, failed to ease your suffering, failed to give you the life your father's heroism should have earned. The words were beautiful. They were also lies, if Marjorie was right. If her father had been running, had been there by accident, had been escaping debts rather than embracing heroism. But Elena kept her face carefully neutral, kept her eyes fixed on the king, and swallowed the truth like poison that might kill her if she let it out. Today, I rectify that failure. Roderick gestured, and a priest stepped forward, carrying an ornate wooden box. Today, you are elevated to nobility. You will hold lands, title, and most importantly, a voice in the governance of this kingdom. Specifically, you will serve as advocate for the common people, with power to review and veto any royal decree that affects the lower classes. He paused, letting the gasps and outraged whispers wash over the hall before continuing. This includes decisions made by my son and heir, Prince Caius. The prince's smile never wavered, but Elena saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. His hands remained perfectly still at his sides, but she noticed now what she'd missed before. His fingernails were digging into his palms hard enough that small crescents of blood stained his skin. The priest opened the box, revealing a silver circlet studded with small emeralds. Nothing compared to the crown the king wore, but more wealth than Elena had ever touched. As the priest lifted it toward her head, she had a sudden violent urge to run, to tear off this dress, to sprint back to the servants' quarters, to grab her mother and brother and disappear into the countryside where titles and debts and dying kings couldn't reach them. The circlet settled onto her head, cold and heavy as guilt. "Rise, Lady Elena Thorne." The king's voice was rough now, strained. "Rise and face your new life." She stood, legs shaking, and turned to face the assembly. The hatred in the room was palpable, thick enough to choke on. But worse than the hatred was what she saw in the servants' section. Accusation. Betrayal. The girl who'd scrubbed floors beside them yesterday now wore silver and emeralds. The girl who'd shared their scraps now stood on a dais above them. She'd become everything they'd been taught to resent, and the fact that she hadn't chosen it didn't matter. It never mattered. The ceremony is complete. Roderick's announcement should have ended it, but then he did something that made Elena's blood freeze. He gestured for Caius to step forward. "My son, you will be the first to acknowledge Lady Elena's new position." The prince moved with liquid grace, each step precise and controlled. When he reached Elena, he bowed. The movement was technically perfect, the exact depth required for greeting someone of equal noble rank. But his eyes never left hers, and what she saw in those pale blue depths was a promise written in ice and iron. "Lady Elena." His voice was silk over steel. "I look forward to working with you in service to the kingdom. I'm certain we will learn much from each other." He straightened, and then so quietly that only she could hear, added, "Your brother works in the stables, third stall from the east entrance. He's there alone every morning at dawn, mucking out the horses. Accidents happen in stables, kicks from nervous animals, falls from, haylofts. Tragic, really, how dangerous that work can be." Elena's vision blurred at the edges. Her brother, 13 years old, thin as a whip from years of insufficient food, working himself to exhaustion to help their mother. And this child, this 11-year-old boy with his perfect bow and his silk clothes, was threatening to kill him as casually as someone might discuss the weather. "You threaten my family, I'll—" The words escaped before she could stop them. "You'll what?" Caius interrupted, his smile widening. "Use your new power? Veto my decisions? Run to my dying father?" He leaned closer, his breath smelling of mint and cruelty. "My father has 8 months, maybe less. You have power for 8 months. I have power forever. Do the mathematics, Lady Elena." "Caius." The king's voice cut between them. "Is there a problem?" The prince stepped back smoothly, his expression shifting to one of innocent concern. "Not at all, father. I was simply assuring Lady Elena that she can count on my full cooperation. After all, we both want what's best for the kingdom, don't we?" He turned that angelic face back to Elena. "Don't we, my lady?" She wanted to scream, wanted to tear the circlet from her head and throw it at his feet, wanted to grab him by his fine collar and shake him until that smug expression cracked. But she was surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, wearing a dress worth more than her family's lives, and the king who'd given her this poisoned gift was watching, with eyes that burned with fever and hope. "Of course, Your Highness." The words tasted like ash. "The kingdom's welfare is all that matters." "Excellent." Roderick sagged back against his throne, looking suddenly older, frailer. "Then this assembly is dismissed. Lady Elena, you will attend the council meeting this afternoon. We have much to discuss regarding the new grain taxes." The crowd began to disperse, nobles clustering together in tight groups, their whispers building like storm winds. Servants melted back toward their duties, but not before Elena caught sight of Martha, the 7-year-old kitchen girl with burned arms, staring at her with eyes full of something that looked horribly like heartbreak. As Elena turned to leave the dais, Marjorie appeared at her elbow, face carefully blank. But she pressed a small piece of parchment into Elena's hand, palm to palm where no one could see. Elena waited until she was back in her chambers before unfolding it. The message was brief, written in shaky letters that suggested haste or fear or both. "Your mother collapsed this morning. The physician says her lungs are failing faster than expected. 3 months, perhaps less." The prince was seen leaving the physician's quarters last night. The council chamber was a room designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadows, massive oak tables scarred with centuries of decisions, walls lined with the painted faces of dead kings, whose eyes seemed to follow movement with unnerving precision. Elena sat in a chair that was too large for her, feeling like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Except her mother had never owned anything finer than patched wool, and this chair was upholstered in leather that probably cost more than a year of medicine for dying lungs. 6 council members surrounded the table, their faces ranging from openly hostile to carefully neutral. Lord Ashford sat directly across from her, his crimson velvet a slash of blood against the dark wood. To her left, an elderly woman with iron-gray hair and more rings than fingers, Lady Beatrice, the kingdom's treasurer. To her right, a younger man with calculating eyes and ink-stained fingers, Lord Perth, master of records. The others blurred together in her panicked mind, nobles whose names she'd heard screamed in kitchens, but whose actual power she'd never bothered to understand. King Roderick occupied the head of the table, Prince Caius at his right hand. The boy looked impossibly composed, hands folded neatly before him, expression one of polite attentiveness. But Elena had learned to watch his fingernails. They drummed against each other in a rhythm too controlled to be unconscious. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Like he was counting down to something. The matter before us is the grain tax for the eastern provinces. Roderick's voice was stronger here, away from the performative grandeur of the throne room. Lord Ashford proposes increasing it by 15% to fund the new fortifications along the northern border. Lady Elena, as advocate for the common people, your opinion is required. Every eye turned to her. The weight of their attention was crushing, suffocating. Elena's mouth went dry. She knew nothing about grain taxes, about fortifications, about eastern provinces or northern borders. She knew how to scrub stone floors without destroying her knees. She knew which moldy bread was still safe to eat and which would make you sick. For days. She knew the exact tone of voice that meant a noble was about to strike you, and the subtle shift in posture that meant you should disappear immediately. Her voice cracked. She swallowed, forced herself to continue. I would need to understand how this affects the farmers. 15% of what? Their total yield? Their profits? And who determines what counts as grain? Just wheat and barley, or also oats and rye? Lord Ashford's lip curled. The tax structure is clearly outlined. In the existing protocols. Surely you reviewed the documents before attending this meeting. No one gave me documents. The words came out sharper than intended, edged with the frustration of being set up to fail. I was told to attend. I attended. Perhaps, Lady Beatrice interjected, her voice dry as ancient paper. We should have provided our newest council member with the relevant materials. An oversight on our part. Her tone suggested it was no oversight at all, though I questioned the wisdom of granting veto power to someone unfamiliar with basic governance structures. She'll learn. Roderick's defense was weak, distracted. He'd placed one hand on the table to steady himself, Elena noticed. Small tremors ran through his fingers. We all had to learn once. Most of us learned over years of careful education, Your Majesty. Lord Perth's voice was smooth, reasonable, poisonous. Not in a single afternoon elevation ceremony, but perhaps Lady Elena's common origins provide a perspective we lack. Tell us, my lady, what do you think farmers can afford to pay? It was a trap. Elena could feel it closing around her like iron jaws. If she said they could afford 15%, she'd betray everyone she came from. If she said they couldn't, she'd be blocking necessary defenses, potentially endangering the kingdom. And she had no way of knowing which answer was actually true. I think, she said slowly, buying time to think, that I can't answer without visiting the eastern provinces myself, without talking to the farmers, without understanding their yields and their costs and their margins. She met Lord Perth's eyes directly. I think asking me to make this decision without information is designed to make me fail, and I think you're all counting on that. The silence that followed was electric. Lord Ashford's face flushed purple. Lady Beatrice's rings clinked as her hand tightened on her goblet. But Prince Caius, his drumming fingers stopped. Just stopped. Frozen mid-count. And when he looked at her, Elena saw something flicker behind the hatred. Surprise, maybe, or respect, or recalculation. Well said. The words came from Marjorie, who'd been standing so still against the wall that Elena had forgotten she was there. The head of household stepped forward, placing a leather satchel on the table before Elena. The documents Lady Elena should have received this morning. Tax records for the eastern provinces, yield reports for the past 5 years, and testimonials from the regional administrators. She looked pointedly at Lord Perth. All materials that were prepared and somehow never delivered to her chambers. Perth's smile didn't waver. A clerical error, surely. The transition has been chaotic. Chaotic? Marjorie repeated the word like she was examining something rotten. Yes. Many chaotic things happening lately. The Lady Elena's mother collapsing. Her brother nearly crushed by a falling beam in the stables this morning. Thankfully, he moved just in time. Little Martha developing a sudden fever despite having been healthy yesterday. All very chaotic. Elena's heart stopped. Her brother. The beam. Caius had said accidents happen in stables. Had it already started? Was he already making good on his threats? Concerning coincidences. Roderick's voice cut through her panic. Commander Walsh, I want guards assigned to Lady Elena's family, discreetly but effectively. We can't have our advocate distracted by worry over her loved one's safety. That won't be necessary. Caius spoke for the first time, his young voice clear and carrying. Surely we're not suggesting anyone would deliberately target a noble's family. That would be treason. And who in this kingdom would commit treason? His gaze swept the room, landing on each council member in turn before settling back on Elena. We're all loyal servants of the crown here, aren't we, Lady Elena? The question was layered with meaning. He was reminding her that her family's safety depended on her compliance, reminding her that guards could only do so much, reminding her that he had resources and patience and time on his side. But he'd also made a mistake. He'd revealed his hand too early, gotten cocky, let his mask slip just enough that others could see it. Elena watched Lord Ashford's eyes narrow slightly, watched Lady Beatrice exchange a glance with Lord Perth. They were ambitious nobles who'd spent decades navigating court politics. They recognized the game being played, even if they didn't fully understand the stakes yet. Of course, Your Highness, Elena forced her voice steady. We're all loyal, which is why I'll need 3 days to review these documents thoroughly before making my recommendation on the grain tax. I assume the council can wait 3 days for a properly informed decision. The fortifications are urgent. Lord Ashford's protest was automatic. 3 days won't matter if we've waited this long. Roderick's support surprised. Her. Lady Elena is correct. An informed decision is worth the delay. We'll reconvene on this matter in 3 days. He started to stand, then swayed slightly. Caius was there immediately, steadying his father with a hand that looked solicitous, but held just a bit too tight. Father needs rest. The prince's concern was flawlessly performed. This meeting has exhausted him. Perhaps Lady Elena could escort him back to his chambers? As our newest council member, she should become familiar with attending to the king's needs. Another trap. If she refused, she'd look callous. If she accepted, she'd be alone with the dying king, vulnerable to accusations of anything from incompetence to poisoning if something went wrong. I'll accompany them. Marjorie's intervention was smooth. 3 sets of hands are better than 2 when the king is unsteady. They made an odd procession through the castle corridors. The king leaning heavily on his son, Elena walking beside them, feeling utterly useless, Marjorie trailing behind like a shadow that saw everything. Servants pressed themselves against walls as they passed, eyes downcast, but Elena caught glimpses of their expressions: fear, confusion, and in one case from a young man she recognized from the kitchens, something that looked horribly like anticipation. They'd almost reached the royal chambers when Roderick suddenly stopped, gripping Caius's arm with surprising strength. Tell her. His voice was urgent, barely above a whisper, but carrying in the stone corridor. Tell her about Marcus, about what really happened. She deserves to know. Caius's face went blank. Father, you need rest. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly for the first time in years. Roderick turned to Elena, and his eyes were desperate, haunted. Your father wasn't running toward the attack. He was running from something, and He coughed, hard, and this time he couldn't hide the blood that sprayed across his palm. I'm the reason he died, not the assassin. The king's chambers smelled of sickness and expensive herbs trying to mask it. Roderick collapsed onto his bed with a groan that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his lungs, somewhere in his bones where death was already setting up residence. Caius moved to pour water from a silver pitcher, his movements mechanical, his face still locked in that terrible blankness. But Elena saw his hand shake, just slightly, just enough, as he lifted the cup to his father's lips. Everyone out. Roderick's command was weak but clear. Except Elena. I need to speak with her. Alone. Father, you're not well. You're saying things that don't make sense. Caius set the cup down with deliberate care. You need rest, not conversation. Lady Elena can return tomorrow when you're stronger. I won't be stronger tomorrow. The king's laugh was bitter, wet. I'll be weaker tomorrow and weaker the day after until there's nothing left but regrets and unpaid debts. Get out, Caius. That's not a request. For a long moment, the prince didn't move. Elena watched emotions flicker across his young face too quickly to identify. Rage, fear, calculation, something else she couldn't name. Then the mask snapped back into place, smooth as glass, and he bowed with perfect precision. As you wish, Father. He walked toward the door, but paused beside Elena, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, close enough to whisper without being overheard. Whatever he tells, you will change nothing. Remember that. Remember who holds power when he's gone. Then he was out, the door clicking shut with that soft, final sound that Elena had come to associate with threats. Marjorie followed, but not before catching Elena's eye and giving the tiniest shake of her head. A warning, or maybe just acknowledgement that whatever came next would be terrible. Alone with the dying king, Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. The room was too warm, air thick with incense and illness. Roderick gestured weakly toward a chair beside the bed, and she sat because her legs were shaking too badly to keep standing. Your father didn't save me from an assassin. The words came out flat, exhausted. There was no assassin. Not that day. Elena's world tilted. But everyone says, the story is a lie I've been telling for 22 years. Roderick closed his eyes, and in the dim light filtering through heavy curtains, he looked ancient. Marcus was running. You were right about that part. He had debts to men who break bones for interest payments. He'd borrowed money to buy medicine for your grandmother. She was dying. Same sickness your mother has now. Same thing that runs in your blood and will probably kill you too eventually. His voice was clinical, detached, like he was reciting facts about strangers. He couldn't pay. They were coming for him, so he ran. I don't understand. Elena's voice sounded distant to her own ears. If there was no assassin, how did he die? How did he save you? I killed him. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Not with my hands, with my stupidity, with my arrogance. I was 23 years old and new to the throne and desperate to prove I was strong. There were rumors of an assassination plot, real ones, mind you, just not that day. I'd been on edge for weeks, seeing threats in every shadow. Your father came running around a corner in the market square, wild-eyed, terrified, not watching where, he was going. He crashed into me, into the king. My guards thought he was attacking me. They reacted. Elena felt something cold spreading through her chest. They killed him. They ran him through before I could stop them, before I could even process what was happening. One moment he was there, confused and apologetic, trying to explain he'd just been running from someone. The next moment he was on the ground bleeding out, and people were screaming, and my guards were swearing he'd tried to stab me. Roderick's hands twisted in the blankets. I could have told the truth, should have told the truth, but my advisors, they saw an opportunity, a heroic narrative, a common man sacrificing himself for his king. It would unite the people, they said, give them something to believe in, make them love me. So you let them think he was a hero. The words tasted like poison. I made him a hero. I created the story, embellished it, had poets write songs about his courage. And then I forgot about his family, because acknowledging you would mean maintaining the lie, and every time I saw you, I'd have to remember what I'd done. Roderick finally opened his eyes, and they were full of something that might have been remorse, or might just have been fear of divine judgment. Until 3 weeks ago, when my physician told me I had less than a year. Suddenly all those convenient lies felt like chains dragging me toward hell. I needed to make it right, needed to give you something, anything, to balance the scales. Elena sat frozen, her mind trying to reconcile 22 years of believing her father died heroically with this new, uglier truth. He'd been running from debts he'd incurred trying to save his mother, running scared and desperate and human, and he'd been murdered for the crime of being in the wrong place, crashing into the wrong person, existing in a moment when nervous guards had their hands on their weapons. You gave me power to ease your conscience. Her voice was hollow. You threw me into this nightmare with your son, made me a target for every noble in the kingdom, put my family in danger. Also, you could die feeling slightly less guilty about murdering an innocent man. Yes, the admission was simple, terrible. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. This was about me, my guilt, my fear, my desperate need to believe I'm not entirely a monster before I face whatever comes after death. He struggled to sit up, failed, fell back against the pillows. But that doesn't make the power less real. You have it now. What you do with it, that's yours to decide. You could use it to help people like your father, people who get crushed by circumstances and cruel systems, or you could walk away, take a bag of gold, disappear into a quiet life somewhere far from here. Your son won't let me walk away. Elena's laugh was sharp as broken glass. He's already made that clear. The moment you die, I'm dead too. Or worse. Caius is afraid of you. Roderick's words were barely audible. That's why he's threatening your family. That's why he's moving so aggressively. He's 11 years old, and you're the first person who's ever had real power over him. He doesn't know how to handle it except with violence and intimidation. He's succeeding. Elena stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something with the rage building in her chest, like steam in a covered pot. My mother is dying. My brother almost got crushed today. Little. Martha has a mysterious fever. He's picking us off one by one, and you're lying here telling me about your guilt? Like that fixes anything. It doesn't fix anything. Roderick's voice was fading now, exhaustion pulling him under. But I wanted you to know the truth. The whole truth. What you do with it is your choice. You could expose me, destroy my legacy. Tell the kingdom their beloved story of Marcus Thorne was built on murdered innocence and royal lies. His eyes drifted closed. Maybe you should. Maybe that's the justice here. Elena stared at the dying man, at this king who'd built his reign on her father's accidental death and was now trying to purchase redemption with gifts she never wanted. Part of her wanted to scream. Part of her wanted to grab him and shake him until he acknowledged the full weight of what he'd done. But mostly she just felt tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. If I expose you, she said quietly, what happens to the power you gave me? Does it disappear? When your legacy crumbles, does the council void my appointment if they learn it was built on lies? She moved toward the door. You didn't think this through, did you? You just acted, trying to feel better, and now I'm trapped in a web of your making with no good options. Elena. His voice stopped her at the threshold. Your father loved you. That's not a lie. In his last moments, when he was bleeding out in the market square, he said your name. Said to tell his little girl he was sorry. Sorry he couldn't bring the medicine home. Sorry he'd failed you. Roderick's breathing had become labored, ragged. That's the one true thing in all of this. He loved you enough to die trying to save his mother so you wouldn't have to watch her suffer. That love was real, even if everything else was a lie. Elena left without responding, because there was nothing to say. Her father had loved her and died running from debts and been murdered by mistake and transformed into a false hero. And now, she wore silver and emeralds purchased with his blood and lies. The truth didn't set her free. It just gave her more weight to carry. Caius was waiting in the corridor. Of course he was. The prince leaned against the stone wall with a casualness that was purely performative. Arms crossed, one ankle hooked over the other. He looked like a portrait of aristocratic ease, but his eyes, those pale, calculating eyes, tracked Elena's every movement with predatory focus. Waiting. Always waiting. Did he tell you? Caius's question was conversational, almost friendly, about the grand lie that built his legacy, about your heroic father who was really just a debtor running scared. He pushed off the wall with fluid grace. I heard everything through the door. These old castles have excellent acoustics if you know where to listen. Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides. The silver circlet on her head suddenly felt obscene, a crown made of her father's accidental martyrdom and a king's. Guilty conscience. You were eavesdropping on your dying father. I was gathering information. Caius corrected her like a patient tutor with a slow student. There's a difference. And now we both know the truth. Your power, your title, your precious position, it's all built on a foundation of lies. One word from me to the council, and it all collapses. He stepped closer, invading her space with deliberate precision. But I'm not going to say that word. Not yet. Do you know why? Because you enjoy watching me suffer. The words came out flat, exhausted. Partly. His smile was sharp as a blade, but mostly because destroying you publicly would be too quick, too clean. Where's the lesson in that? He circled her slowly, and Elena fought the urge to turn and keep him in her sights. Showing fear would feed him. No, I want you to feel what I felt. The humiliation. The helplessness, the knowledge that everything you are exists only because someone more powerful decided to allow it. You're 11 years old. Elena's voice cracked despite her best efforts. You're a child. Children are supposed to what? Caius interrupted, his tone suddenly ice-cold. Play with wooden swords? Obey their tutors? Accept humiliation from their fathers in front of the entire court? He stopped directly in front of her, and the hatred radiating from him was so intense it felt like heat. I stopped being a child the moment my father decided to use me as an object lesson. The moment he made you my keeper, my judge, my constant reminder that I'm not good enough. So no, Lady Elena, I'm not a child. I'm your enemy, and I'm patient. The corridor felt like it was closing in, stone walls pressing tighter, air growing thinner. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze. What do you want? Really want? Because I can't undo what your father did. I can't give you back whatever innocence or childhood you think I stole. I didn't ask for this. What I want. Caius's laugh was ugly, sharp. I want you to understand that every moment of safety you feel is an illusion I'm allowing you to have. I want you to jump at shadows. I want you to second-guess every meal, every drink, every friendly face. I want you to know that your mother's illness could worsen suddenly, that your brother could have another accident, and this time the beam won't miss. That little Martha's fever might become something more serious. He tilted his head, studying her reaction. I want you to live in the same cage I've lived in for the past 3 days, knowing someone has power over everyone you love and there's nothing you can do about it. Then you've already won. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I'm terrified. Every second of every day. Is that enough? Can we stop now? For a moment, something flickered across Caius's face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion, like he'd expected her to keep fighting, keep throwing defiance at him, and her surrender had disrupted whatever script he'd been following. His hand rose, hesitated in the air between them, then dropped back to his side. It's not enough. But his voice had lost some of its sharp edge. Because you still have the power. You still sit on the council. You still have my father's protection, such as it is. You still wear that circlet. His eyes fixed on the silver band. Take it off. What? Take it off. Right now. Here in the corridor. Show me you understand how fragile your position really is. His hand moved to rest on the small dagger at his belt. Decorative, ceremonial, but sharp enough to hurt if he wanted it to. Or I walk back into my father's chambers and tell him you tried to smother him with a pillow. That I pulled you off just in time. Who do you think he'll believe? His beloved son, or the common girl he elevated out of guilt? Elena's hands rose slowly to the circlet. Her fingers trembled as they touched the cold silver. This was a test, a game, a demonstration of exactly what Caius had said, that her power existed only because he allowed it to. She could refuse, could scream, could run. But they were alone in a deserted corridor, and he had a weapon and a story and generations of privilege that would make any accusation from his lips more believable than truth from hers. She removed the circlet, held it in shaking hands. The weight of it seemed to increase the moment it left her head, like gravity itself was judging her weakness. Caius took it from her, turned it over in his hands, examining it with theatrical interest. 23 emeralds. I counted. Each one worth more than your family will earn in 5 years, even with my father's generous stipend. He held it up to catch the torchlight, making the gems sparkle like green fire. Beautiful, isn't it? The way wealth looks when it's concentrated in a small, pretty object. So much easier to appreciate than scattered across hundreds of starving peasants. Give it back. Elena hated how her voice shook. Why? Caius lowered the circlet, his expression genuinely curious now. It's just a symbol. You said you didn't want this power. You said you didn't ask for it, so why do you care if I take it away? The question burrowed under her skin like a splinter. Why did she care? The circlet was heavy and uncomfortable. The power was a cage. The responsibility was crushing. She should be relieved to have it taken from her, should thank him for releasing her from this nightmare. But beneath the fear and exhaustion, something else stirred. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder and more dangerous. The slow-burning rage of someone who'd spent their entire life being told they were worthless, invisible, expendable. And for 3 days, just 3 days, she'd been visible. People had been forced to acknowledge her, to include her, to consider her opinion even if they hated every word. Because it's mine. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Caius. Not because I deserve it or earned it or wanted it, but because your father gave it to me, and taking it means you win. And I'm tired of people like you winning while people like me lose everything and call it fairness. Caius stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he held the circlet out. Take it. Elena didn't move. What's the trap? No trap. Take it. Put it back on. His expression was unreadable now, mask firmly in place. You passed the test. What test? She took the circlet but didn't put it on. Suspicion. Coiling in her gut. The test to see if you actually care about power or just about survival. Caius stepped back, creating space between them. Everyone in this castle wants power for what it gets them. Wealth, influence, control. You're the first person I've met who hates having it but refuses to let it go anyway. That's... He paused, searching for words. That's interesting. Unexpected. I'm so glad I can be your interesting experiment. Elena's voice dripped sarcasm as she placed the circlet back on her head, fingers still shaking from adrenaline. You're not an experiment. Caius's tone had shifted again, becoming something almost contemplative. You're a problem I haven't figured out how to solve. Everyone else would have broken by now, would have run or begged or tried to make deals. But you just... He gestured vaguely. You keep existing. Keep showing up. Keep being afraid but doing it anyway. Why? Because I don't have a choice. Elena's exhaustion was bone deep. Now. Because if I run, you'll hurt my family. If I break, you'll hurt my family. If I fight back too hard, you'll hurt my family. So I exist. I show up. I'm afraid. Because maybe, if I'm here and visible and absorbing your attention, they'll be safe. That's the only reason. Something complicated crossed Caius's face. For just a moment the mask cracked, and Elena saw beneath it a child who didn't know how to stop what he'd started, who'd committed to a course of cruelty, and couldn't figure out how to back down without losing face. An 11-year-old boy playing a game with rules he barely understood, and stakes that terrified him. Then the crack sealed. The mask returned. Tomorrow there's a council meeting about the eastern provinces. You've had 3 days to review the documents. I assume you have an opinion on the grain tax? His voice was businesslike now, almost cordial. I hope it's a strong one. The council is expecting you to fail, prove them wrong, and things get interesting. Fail, and... He shrugged. Well, failures don't need protection, do they? He walked away then, leaving Elena alone in the corridor with a circlet that suddenly weighed more than stone, and the terrible knowledge that tomorrow she would have to prove she deserved power she never wanted to people who were already betting on her destruction. The council chamber felt different this morning. Same vaulted ceilings, same scarred oak table, same painted eyes of dead kings watching from the walls. But something in the air had shifted. Tension wound so tight that Elena could feel it pressing against her skin like an approaching storm. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights reading grain yields and tax records until the numbers blurred together, until she could recite provincial outputs in her dreams. But knowledge and confidence were different animals, and only one of them sat in her chest as she took her seat at the table. Lord Ashford was already present, his crimson velvet somehow brighter today, more aggressive. Lady Beatrice arranged her rings with deliberate precision, each small clink against the wood a tiny declaration of judgment. Lord Perth had ink stains on his fingers again, but his eyes were sharp, hungry for the spectacle of watching her fail. The other council members filled in like spectators at an execution, arranging themselves for the best view. King Roderick looked worse than 3 days ago. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made Elena think of spoiled meat, and the hand he rested on the table trembled constantly, small earthquakes that he couldn't control. He caught her looking and offered a weak smile that might have been encouragement, or might have been apology. Hard to tell with dying men who'd built their redemption on her suffering. Prince Caius sat perfectly still, hands folded, expression neutral. But Elena had learned to read the small signs, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his breathing was just a fraction too controlled. He was nervous. Actually, nervous. Whatever happened in this meeting mattered to him in ways she didn't fully understand yet. Lady Elena, Lord Ashford's voice cut through the settling silence. You've had 3 days to review the grain tax proposal. We're eager to hear your perspective. The pause before perspective carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken insults. Do you support the 15% increase for the eastern provinces? Every eye turned to her. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The common girl elevated above her station, finally exposed as the fraud they knew she was. Elena felt sweat trickling down her spine, soaking into the expensive fabric of her dress. Her mouth was dry as old parchment. The documents in front of her might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the confidence they gave her now. No. The word came out stronger than she felt. I don't support the 15% increase. I propose a structured alternative that addresses the defense needs without destroying the eastern farmers. Lord Ashford's eyebrows rose. An alternative? How ambitious? His tone suggested she'd just announced plans to build castles in the clouds. Please enlighten us. Elena's hands were shaking, so she pressed them flat against the table, anchoring herself. The eastern provinces had a drought 2 years ago. Yields dropped by 30%. They've recovered some, but they're still only producing at 85% of their historical average. A 15% tax increase on reduced yields doesn't just cut into profits, it cuts into survival reserves. She pulled out one of the documents Marjorie had provided, willing her voice to stay steady. 3 villages in the Eastern Territories have already requested emergency grain stores this season. Increasing the tax will push that to 10 villages, maybe more. Emergency requests can be fabricated. Lord Perth's objection was smooth, practiced. Regional administrators have been known to exaggerate hardship to reduce their tax burden, which is why I spent yesterday sending riders to interview the farmers directly. Elena met his gaze, saw surprise flicker across his face. Not the administrators, not the tax collectors, the actual farmers. 23 of them responded. Would you like to hear what they said? The silence that followed was different than before. Not hostile exactly, more like recalculation. Lady Beatrice's rings had stopped clinking. Lord Ashford's expression had shifted from condescending amusement to something more guarded. You sent riders. King Roderick's voice carried a hint of something that might have been pride or might have been surprise that she'd actually tried. Without authorization, without council approval. I used my personal stipend to pay them. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. I assumed that as advocate for the common people, gathering information from common people fell within my responsibilities. Was I wrong? It was a gamble. A direct challenge to their authority wrapped in a question that made refusing look petty. She watched the council members exchange glances, saw the political calculation happening in real time. Continue. Roderick's permission was quiet but clear. What did your riders discover? Elena pulled out the hastily compiled notes, pages covered in rough handwriting from men who could barely read themselves but had tried their best to record. What farmers said. The eastern provinces can sustain an 8% tax increase if it's implemented gradually over 2 years instead of all at once. The farmers I spoke with said they could manage 4% this year, 4% next year, with the understanding that if there's another drought, the increase is suspended. She looked up from the papers. In exchange for this graduated increase, they're willing to commit to meeting specific yield targets. If they exceed those targets, the excess goes to the Crown as additional tax. If they fall short, we revisit the tax rate. Farmers negotiating with the Crown. Lord Ashford's laugh was sharp. Next, you'll suggest we let stable boys set foreign policy. I'm suggesting we treat people like partners instead of resources to be drained. Elena's voice had more heat now, anger burning through the fear. The northern fortifications are important. I'm not disputing that. But what good are fortifications protecting empty villages? Because we starve the farmers to pay for them. 8% over 2 years won't fund the full fortification plan. Lady Beatrice's objection was practical rather than hostile. We'd need to find additional revenue sources or scale back the construction. Then we find additional revenue sources. Elena pulled out another document. This one she'd prepared herself in shaky handwriting after Marjorie taught her basic accounting. The Royal Hunting Preserve in the Western Forest covers 2,000 acres. The Crown hasn't used it for hunting in 5 years. Lease half of it to timber merchants with sustainable harvest contracts. That generates immediate revenue and creates jobs. The harbor fees in the southern port haven't been adjusted in 12 years despite increased trade traffic. A modest 5% increase there brings in significant funds without crushing merchants. And she hesitated, then pushed forward because she'd come this far. The royal household employs 47 servants in positions that duplicate each other. Consolidating those roles saves enough to fund 3 months of fortification construction. The silence was absolute. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel every eye boring into her like hot pokers. She just suggested reducing the royal household, cutting into the very systems that kept nobles comfortable. It was either brilliance or suicide, and she wouldn't know which until someone spoke. Caius moved. Just slightly. Just enough to lean forward and rest his elbows on the table. His expression was unreadable, but when he spoke, his voice carried no mockery. The duplicate positions in the royal household. You have specifics. 47 positions. Elena forced herself to look at him directly. Your father employs 6 wine stewards. 6. For 1 castle. The same wine could be managed by 2 stewards with proper organization. There are 9 flower arrangers for decorative purposes when 4 could do the same. Work. 11. 11 message runners when the castle has a functioning bell system that was installed 8 years ago and barely used. Caius finished her sentence, and something sharp flashed in his eyes. I've noticed the same inefficiencies. Mentioned them to my tutors, who told me it wasn't a prince's concern. It's definitely a future king's concern. Lord Perth's tone had shifted, no longer dismissive. If Lady Elena's numbers are accurate, the cost savings would be substantial. Combined with her other proposals, he trailed off, making calculations on a piece of parchment. It could work. The timeline would be tighter, but it could actually work. This is absurd. Lord Ashford's protest was automatic, but it lacked conviction now. We're actually considering letting farmers dictate terms to the crown based on the word of some girl who learned to read tax documents 3 days ago. We're considering a proposal that demonstrates more fiscal awareness than we've seen from this council in years. Lady Beatrice's rings clinked as she tapped the table thoughtfully. I hate to admit it, but Lady Elena's graduated approach is actually sound. Risky, dependent on cooperation, but sound. King Roderick was smiling. Actually smiling, despite the pain that clearly racked his body. The council will vote. All in favor of Lady Elena's alternative proposal. 4 hands rose. Lady Beatrice, Lord Perth, 2 others whose names Elena still couldn't remember. 4 out of 8. Opposed? Lord Ashford's hand shot up, joined by 2 others. 3 opposed. Everyone turned to Caius. The prince sat perfectly still, hand resting on the table, not raised, not lowered. The deciding vote. The power to support her or destroy her recommendation and, by extension, her credibility. Elena watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to identify. His fingernails drummed against the wood. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in favor. Motion passes. Roderick's voice was triumphant, stronger than it had been in days. Lady Elena's proposal will be implemented immediately. Lord Perth, draft the necessary documents. Lady Beatrice, begin the revenue assessments. Lord Ashford. The king's smile turned sharp. Try to look less disappointed that progress happened despite your objections. The meeting dissolved into logistics and arguments and planning, but Elena barely heard any of it. She sat frozen, staring at Caius, trying to understand why he'd voted for her proposal. He met her gaze across the table, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. What she saw underneath wasn't hatred or cruelty or calculation. It was confusion, like he'd surprised himself, like he'd made a decision he didn't fully understand and was now trying to figure out what it meant. As the council filed out, Caius paused beside her chair. You did well. The words were quiet, meant only for her. Better than well. You actually thought about it, about people, about consequences. He hesitated, then added even more quietly. That proposal about duplicate servants? I've been saying that for 2 years. No one listened. They listened today. Elena's voice was careful, probing. Because you voted with me. Don't read too much into it. The mask started sliding back into place. Your proposal made sense. That's all. It doesn't change anything between us. But they both knew that was a lie. Something had shifted. Some calculation had been disrupted. The game had rules, and someone had just moved a piece in a direction neither player expected. Caius walked away, leaving Elena alone in the council chamber with her racing heart and the terrifying knowledge that she'd just won a battle she never wanted to fight. And in this castle, in this game of power and survival, winning might be more dangerous than losing, because now the council knew she was competent. Now they knew she could actually do this job. Now the threat she represented was real instead of theoretical, and Prince Caius, 11 years old, brilliant, wounded, dangerous, had just helped her prove it. Elena's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the right choice and the safe choice are enemies, and we're forced to pick sides knowing either decision will cost us something we can't afford to lose. She accepted power built on lies to protect people she loved, only to discover that power makes you a target for everyone who resents what you represent. Would you have taken that circlet, knowing it came with a price tag written in your family's safety? Would you have stayed silent about the king's confession, carrying the weight of your father's false heroism to maintain the illusion that keeps you alive? Or would you have walked away, chosen survival over justice, and lived with the guilt of abandoning those who needed your voice? The cruelest lesson in Elena's journey isn't that power corrupts. It's that powerlessness corrupts differently, forcing good people to make compromises that slowly hollow them out from the inside. She proved herself capable, earned grudging respect from a council that wanted her to fail, and even managed to shift something in the heart of a wounded child bent on her destruction. But capability doesn't guarantee safety. Respect doesn't erase threats. And changing one person's mind doesn't transform a system designed to crush people like her. The real question isn't whether Elena will survive the next 8 months. It's whether the person who survives will still recognize herself in the mirror. We all wear crowns we never asked for, carry responsibilities that were thrust upon us by circumstances beyond our control, and make daily choices between protecting ourselves and protecting others. Elena's story reminds us that heroism isn't always loud and dramatic. Sometimes it's just showing up every day to a battle you know you might lose, because the alternative is letting cruelty win by default. If this story moved you, if it made you think about power and justice and the impossible choices we face when doing the right thing costs everything, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow our channel for more stories that challenge us to examine the uncomfortable truths we'd rather ignore. Because the best stories don't give us easy answers. They give us better questions to ask ourselves.